Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Another movie set in the land of Oz, this time created by Disney. Surely such a film would feature even more bright colors, songs, dancing, and lighthearted joy than the original, right? Well, you couldn't be more wrong. Return to Oz, made in 1985, made our revisit to this world of whimsy into a petrifying and horrifying escapade, thrusting audiences everywhere into a nightmare that they simply weren't prepared for. It seems as though someone over at Disney saw the original and marveled at the evilness of the witch and her underlings, and decided to make a whole movie dedicated to the dark side of Oz. And that's exactly what we have here. A unique work combining several L. Frank Baum Oz books, along with a nod or two to the original MGM movie, into an artistically beautiful and hair-raisingly haunting new tale about Dorothy's adventures in the land of Oz. Now, I know up till now I've needed to justify some things on this series for being scary for its time, but rest assured, this one needs no defense. Whenever you watch it, it's downright bone-chilling. The film picks up 6 months after the events of the first movie, and Dorothy is obsessed with Oz, believing so vehemently in its existence, and being so depressed that she cannot return there. She soon begins to develop maladaptive, depressive, and sleep-related disorders, making her family begin to get terribly worried about her. Her little fantasy world has gone too far, and something must be done. In just 2 months, it'll be the year 1900, and medical science is, of course, at its height. Auntie Em and Uncle Henry decide that admitting Dorothy to a psychiatric hospital for treatment is the only choice they have left to cure her of her delusions of Oz. Auntie Em takes her to see Dr. J.B. Worley in his sanitarium of electric healing, as he submit Dorothy to ECT, or electroconvulsive therapy, in order to rid her of her fantasies. After an unsettling introduction from the doctor, Dorothy is forcibly led away by Nurse Wilson as Aunt Em leaves her behind with nothing but her best wishes. What looks like a comfortable doctor's office downstairs is revealed to be an insane asylum full of tortured souls, locked within their cells down narrow corridors, and Dorothy is led into one by herself amidst the agonized screaming of the other patients. Nurse Wilson places her in confinement, telling her to wait in her room until she is retrieved for therapy. Things are clearly not right here. The entire place has a sinister, deceitful atmosphere, not to mention that the staff itself all seem incredibly cruel and indifferent. In a few hours' time, Nurse Wilson returns with a couple of orderlies to take Dorothy to her session. She's strapped down to a bed and wheeled into a room where Dr. Worley is waiting with the machine. Just as he is prepared to conduct the treatment, a storm breaks out and cuts the power, sending everyone into a panic. As the staff leaves the room to investigate the matter, a young blonde girl appears and frees Dorothy of her restraints and helps her escape the asylum. Just as they're about to make it out, Nurse Wilson sees them and pursues them outside until the girls end up in the river and get whisked away by its current into a vast ocean. Dorothy awakes to find herself, and her chicken Belina somehow, once again in the land of Oz, just inside the deadly desert. She carefully hops the rocks to the adjacent grassy fields, as any living thing that touches the sands of the deadly desert will be turned to stone. Dorothy and Bellina are not fully alone, however, as a gnome within one of the rocks in the desert notices her presence and reports it back to the sinister Gnome King. After some time, they discover the ruins of her old house where it fell in Munchkin Land, but there are no Munchkins to be found, let alone their village itself. Everything is overgrown, and it seems to be an utter ruin. There is a feeling of lonely desolation here. No whimsy to be found, naught but isolation. Dorothy follows the remnants of the yellow brick road back to the Emerald City, only to find that it too lies in ruins, with its citizens turned to stone in mid-action, encased in death forever in their final gestures. A grim warning is written upon a nearby wall. Beware the Wheelers. We're not given enough time to consider what this could mean, as the Wheelers themselves appear out of our nightmares to show us exactly why we should fear them. Twisted monstrosities with terrifying masks and dreadlocks, wheels for hands and feet, maniacally laughing like a pack of hyenas, these abominations are pure savages. They pursue Dorothy all throughout the Emerald City until she discovers a secret false wall that leads to a hidden chamber in which she finds the robot Tick-Tock, a member of the Royal Army of Oz, who pledges to be Dorothy's loyal assistant, as per the Scarecrow's instructions. Nobody knows where the Scarecrow is, and both the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man are encased in stone. It's agreed that they must find the Scarecrow in order to bring peace and happiness back to the land. Tick-Tock helps Dorothy fend off the Wheelers, apprehending one of them to interrogate as to the whereabouts of the Scarecrow. He says that the only person who knows his location is Princess Mombi, the wicked ruler who presides over the ruins of the Emerald City. She's taken over the royal palace and can be found there. At first sight, she appears rather non-threatening, seeming that she could be possibly quite reasonable, despite her ornate and spiky garb. However, when she says,
"I think I'll put on something more appropriate. Come with me. Your friends can stay here."
something far darker about this kind-looking princess is hinted at. When her chambers are revealed, we see a large room full of a multitude of cabinets, all containing living female heads, all staring and watching the proceedings from behind the glass that they're encased in. Princess Mombi removes her current head and puts on another one that greatly resembles Nurse Wilson. Mombi reveals that the Gnome King took the Scarecrow, stole all the emeralds from the city, and turned everybody else to stone. She then whisks Dorothy away to the castle tower, intending to imprison her there until her head is ripe enough to be added to her collection. Tick-Tock is unable to help because his action gears have run down. Who would have thought a wind-up soldier would have been so wonderfully useful? While Dorothy is locked in the tower, she meets a strange being called Jack Pumpkinhead, who is not unlike the Scarecrow. As it turns out, Mombi used her powder of life on him, and then locked him in the tower and promptly forgot about him, perhaps while she was wearing a different head. Jack is able to open the door, and they go to rescue Tick-Tock, and the group designs a plan. They decide that they'll attempt to craft a flying creature out of sofas, palm fronds, and the head of a gump, tying it all together and sprinkling the powder of life on it. Jack tells Dorothy that the powder is most likely located in Cabinet 31, along with Mombi's original head. In an insanely terrifyingly tense sequence, Dorothy steals the key from a headless Mombi's grasp as she sleeps, walking past all of the sleeping heads, unlocking the cabinet. She's just about to take the powder of life when...
Dorothy girl.
She is coming!
After a narrow and harrowing scene, the group is free of Mombi and the Wheelers at last, and they are now on their way to the Gnome King's mountain. After a night of flying, the craft falls apart, conveniently over the Gnome King's mountain, all of the party members landing safely like good little protagonists always do. Following a bit of dialogue, the king invites the group down into his lair and offers them a game. He explains that the scarecrow has become an inanimate ornament in one of his chambers, and each person has 3 chances to go in and guess which one it is in an attempt to free him. Seeing as they have no other choice, the group accepts. One by one they all fail and are turned into ornaments themselves. At last, it is Dorothy's turn, but before she goes, the Gnome King reveals that he stole back the ruby red slippers and could easily send Dorothy home, away from all of this, if she so wishes. Dorothy rejects the offer and instead chooses to attempt to rescue her friends. As Dorothy searches his collection, Mombi and her Wheelers race to the Gnome King's mountain to warn him of Dorothy's impending arrival. A little late on that one, love. Dorothy eventually figures out the key to the puzzle, finding that her companions were turned into green objects. She begins to free all of her friends, one after another, which enrages the Gnome King. He appears in his true form, along with all of his other gnome servants, and prepares to destroy Dorothy and her friends for playing by the rules, I guess? The chamber catches ablaze. The gnomes writhe and block their way out, the threatening figure of the Gnome King spelling out the end for the group. He eats the Gump sofa body, neglecting his head, and is just about to eat Jack, but Belinda the chicken, who was hiding inside of Jack's head this whole time, gets so scared that she lays an egg, which falls out of Jack's head and into the Gnome King's throat and kills him. I mean, sure, it's a dramatic and epic death, but an egg? Really? I mean, okay, but isn't that just kind of silly?
Poison. 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 Poison.
Whatever the case, the gnomes flee and the Gnome King crumbles into nothingness. Dorothy retrieves the ruby red slippers and wishes all of the Gnome King's evil to be undone, and for the Emerald City to return to its former glory. Everyone is reunited, the city and its citizens are restored. Mombi is imprisoned, and Dorothy is able to free Ozma, the true Queen of Oz, from her looking-glass prison in the royal palace. All is well and peaceful. At her request, Ozma sends Dorothy back home to Kansas, with the promise that she can return whenever she'd like. She arrives back in Kansas on the banks of the river from the beginning of the film, and is found by Toto, Uncle Henry, and his search party that went looking for her after she disappeared during the storm. She's taken back home, safe and sound. The asylum was struck by lightning and burnt to the ground, and Nurse Wilson is seen being carried off in a cage by police. As it so happens, only Dr. Worley was killed in an attempt to save his machines. When the process of inhumane treatment he used on his patients was discovered, Nurse Wilson was arrested for her part in it. With the new home finally complete, Dorothy lives in happiness, retaining her connection to Oz and Ozma, and now knowing that all is well, and will continue to be so. How swell! Like the original MGM classic, this is a pretty straightforward tale, with many of the characters in the real world of the film being mirrored in the world of Oz, and their fates being reflected as such. Dorothy and her companions are genuinely likable, kind-hearted, and interesting. Hell, they're very similar archetypes to the characters from the original, with Belinda the Chicken being a lot like the Cowardly Lion, Tick-Tock being a close resemblance to the Tin Man, Jack Pumpkinhead being the Scarecrow, and the Gump being a sofa. But all that aside, this film is very unlike the first. It's hard to believe that they drew from the same sources. The Oz shown to us in this movie is nothing like what we witnessed in the original. It's dark, empty, lonely, forlorn and lifeless. Iconic locales like the Emerald City, Yellow Brick Road, and Munchkin Village are in utter ruin. It has the feeling of a nightmare before the true fear has sprung, a psychological fear in which you know that something is wrong, terribly wrong, that things are off and out of place, but there is no known cause or actual thing to fear. Even in the real world of this film, things are dreadful. Dorothy's aunt and uncle are so worn out with her obsession with Oz that they're willing to expose her to electroshock therapy to cure her. This is a PG Disney movie, and within the first few minutes, this dark topic is indeed broached. Worse yet, Dr. Worley makes light of what he's doing, pointing out the silly face his machine makes, despite the fact that he knows full well how it cripples the patients who undergo his treatments. When Dorothy is left at the clinic, it truly seems as if Auntie Em is abandoning her for dead. She seems so hopeless, but yet so set on what she must do. It almost seems cold, which is quite dissimilar from the passionate Christian woman we saw in the original. All the while, we're screaming at her, begging her not to do this, to not leave her niece to such a dark fate. When Dorothy is taken by the sadistic Nurse Wilson to her room, we truly feel out of her element here. The screams of the patients can be heard, suffering in solitude, and Nurse Wilson's cold, evil demeanor is palpably chilling. She practically takes joy in the suffering of others. She even takes Dorothy's lunch pail, her only comfort of home, away from her. This is the last place we want our hero Dorothy to be. The orderlies fare no better, casting dark, evil looks Dorothy's way, appearing terribly intimidating as they wheel squeaky beds around the dim and lonely hallways. The movie was this close to showing Dorothy getting her brain fried, forcing the audience to wonder truly what they'd gotten themselves into. This was a far and forlorn cry from the happy and bright world of Oz that they'd come to remember from the classic. When Dorothy is freed and eventually makes it to Oz, we think we can perhaps breathe a sigh of relief. But even Oz seems sinister from the get-go. Before we even meet the Wheelers or see the ruined Emerald City, Dorothy finds herself in the Desert of Death, something that was not even mentioned in the classic, and doesn't seem to be that cheery of a place. This is a barren, arid land where anything that touches the sand will die and turn to stone. Quite a far cry from a land full of multicolored horses and bright, cheery singing midgets. Not to mention, when Dorothy hops across the rocks to get to the grass, wouldn't that mean she's hopping on dead things? Just a thought. It's also here that we get our first glimpse of some of the beautiful stop motion and claymation being used in the film. Primarily for all things dealing with the Gnome King, it looks incredibly well done, nailing the visual style and theme of the film perfectly, and doesn't feel out of place at all. It greatly enhances the experience, and adds a unique visual element to the Gnome King and his kingdom. As Dorothy progresses through what's left of Oz, the sights say more than words ever could. This world is desolate, lonely, ruined, and dead. The once happy lands are now mere ghost towns, and the once vibrant, singing people there are now statues, frozen forever in their last actions in life. The Emerald City feels like a graveyard as death permeates the surrounding atmosphere. And again, the Wheelers. Holy shit, these motherfuckers are fright fuel on their own. Sure, characters like Princess Mombi and the Gnome King are pretty hair-raising, but these guys are just here for pure terror, much like the flying monkeys in the original. The sounds they make, the things they say, the way they look and move, everything about them screams nightmare. They're the Oz reflections of the asylum orderlies, and they're anything but orderly. Erratic, insane, and otherworldly, These guys seem to be the one thing that people remember the most from the film, with Princess Mombi being a close second. And it's not hard to see why. They're a mockery of everything around them. Insanity and schizoid behavior in a world of forlorn sadness, preying on a defenseless little girl. These guys have evil written all over them. Though they don't really do much, and how could they? They have wheels for hands and feet. They're just downright creepy. Speaking of Princess Mombi, she's a necessary mention as well. Nurse Wilson incarnate, Prince Mombi is not unlike the Wicked Witch of the West. Sure, she's prettier, but she's just as, if not more, twisted. Taking up residence in the former royal palace, she uses the Wheelers as her servants, taking the heads of other women to add to her collection in order to fuel her vanity. It's a chilling sight, seeing the decapitated heads of over 30 women staring at us as Dorothy follows Mombi into her chambers. Worse yet, when she removes one head to place on another, this grim character grows darker still, as her mannerisms and behaviors change depending on whose head she's wearing. She never touches her original head because of how hideous it is. She'd rather have the heads of beautiful, petrified women who cannot defend themselves. She practically desecrates the dead and wears their body parts. This woman is purely evil and is not afraid to display her wrath for all to see. She also keeps Ozma, the true ruler of Oz, locked within the mirrors of her palace, preventing any hope of her restoring Oz. The worst thing is seeing her wake up from a sound sleep, headless, stumbling along like a zombie in pursuit of Dorothy and her original head, with all of the other heads screaming like a mess of banshees in their cabinets. The sight of a headless Mombi alone is enough to put any kid under the covers. Not to mention, her manic insanity after Dorothy escapes as she pushes the Wheelers out to find her is pretty jarring. She's lost control of the situation and is losing her minds. Yes, all of them simultaneously. Hell, it's even pretty unsettling when a few Wheelers end up in the desert of death and die before our eyes, crumbling to become one with the desert. Sure, these things are twisted monstrosities, and sure, we were wondering what it would look like when someone touched the sand in the desert, but damn. It gets even worse when she forces them to take her to the Gnome King as fast as possible. She seems so terribly out of her mind at this point, not even remotely composed, like she's liable to burst out of the screen and come after us. Speaking of the Gnome King, this guy is one sinister entity. The thing that gets me is that he's actually completely reasonable. Well, I suppose that's what you get when you're emulating a psychologist. All of the gems within the earth belong to him, and all of the people of the Emerald City stole them, so he stole them back, as well as the ruby red slippers. It makes sense. He gives Dorothy and her friends a fair chance to find the Scarecrow, and even provides refreshments to them. He's nothing if not a good host, but one cannot let themselves be fooled by him. This guy is sick. The dark reflection of Dr. Worley, the Gnome King, is passively sadistic. He knows that the game he's entrapped Dorothy and her friends into is nearly impossible. He even tries to make Dorothy betray her friends and turn her back on them. He's in control of everything, and he knows exactly what he's doing. The way his gnomes move about and the walls of the kingdom shift is pretty unnerving, but the darkest part is one that requires a little bit of thought. Early on, the Gnome King appears to just be moving facial features within rock, but as Dorothy's friends fail his sadistic game, one by one, and they get turned into ornaments, the Gnome King slowly gains form, becoming more and more human as each person falls under his spell. Thus, one could conclude that all of the beings in his chambers that have been turned into inanimate objects are not merely suffering under a spell. He is actually draining their very life essence and feeding on it to become fully human, instead of just a consciousness upon stone. He uses that which is practically dead for his own gains, feeding on their life force to sustain himself, and becoming more powerful, not unlike Mombi's multi-headed vanity. His ornament chamber, much like the Emerald City, is practically a cemetery. When Dorothy figures out the trick to his game and the gnomes swarm the chamber, and the king makes an appearance in his full form, it's all pretty hellish, with flames burning behind him as his booming voice shakes the room around him. The Gnome King's true form is incredibly intimidating. He is no longer the polite host. He's sick and tired of the games, and is only concerned with destroying Dorothy. His distorted voice and stop-motion and claymation body provides one of the scariest scenes in the film, as his minions shift around the walls, laughing and sneering as they entrap our heroes. Not to mention, he attempts to eat Dorothy and her companions, as destroying them simply would not do. Ultimately, it all comes to a happy ending, of course, but wow, this was a PG Disney movie, and this is some pretty dark content, at times worse than any horror film out in the modern era. This thing feels far more like a scary horror movie than any fantasy adventure it set out to be, but in the end, it's just so damn awesome. It's got a great imaginative concept, unforgettable visuals and characters, with twisted bad guys, kind-hearted heroes, beautiful effects and sets, and just incredible efforts put into it. It's so unique and so bizarre, and so damn dark that I honestly prefer it over the original classic. It never goes too far, and it never gets bloody or gory or sexual at all. It just manages to tap into the part of our nightmares that we fear the most, and really just scare us shitless. I never saw this film as a kid, and only recently saw it within the past year, but I'm pretty sure it would have spooked me if I had. How could it not? There's so many menacing and purely creepy things here, it's like a buffet of terror. But it never goes too far or forgets its intention. It still tells a great and exciting tale amidst all of the morbid scares in its world. It's great for young and old alike. It really puts the challenge out there to raise the bar for what it believes kids can handle, and that's something I really love about it. This, in my opinion, is the best Oz-related film ever made. It gets all the terror and magic and fantasy it needs, and it's a must if you've never seen it and are into this sort of stuff. It's a nightmare-made film, and it's totally awesome. That's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed the experience this week, and I'll be seeing you all again very soon. No lie.